Got my notes, check. Pepsi, check. Sunglasses, check. Hat, check. Thick skin, check. And sources, check. Let's go. Welcome to Golden Blued, everybody. This is where we cover all of college football. So if you're a college football fan, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button. I call my Patreons the shot callers, and I can't wait to live stream some games and watch it with my Patreons and the score prediction contest. That's going to be fun. Give yourselves a round of applause. We have reached 9,000 subscribers. It's not because of me. I'm just here yapping my head off. It's because of you hitting the subscribe button. That's why we're at 9,000. And we had a goal of 10,000 by the end of the year. We bumped that goal up to before the kickoff of the Backyard Brawl. That's right, Golden Blued trying to get to 10,000 subscribers by September 1st. Let's go. I know we can do it. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Won't you be my neighbor? Yeah, more conference realignment, people shaking hands, finding out who their new neighbor's gonna be. We already know that Texas and Oklahoma, they're headed to the SEC. Then just this past month, we found out that USC and UCLA are headed to the Big Ten. Ever since then, a lot of speculation, a lot of rumors being put in my ear, and I make videos about it. And that's not me saying, hey, this is gonna happen for sure. I'm just passing along what I hear. And today I have more rumors to pass on to you. These rumors are from Brett McMurphy and Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports. It's reported that the Big Ten is indeed interested in some of these Pac-12 teams. Maybe there's a reason that Oregon and Washington have been holding off on the Big 12. From what I'm hearing today, the Big Ten is actually interested in Oregon, Washington, Cal, and Stanford out of the Pac-12. But it doesn't stop there. Brent McMurphy says that the Big Ten is also interested in Miami and Florida State. So that's 6 teams that the Big Ten is interested in. To me, this makes a lot of sense. Honestly, it's one of the things that's made the most sense to me. There's a lot of rumors that's been thrown out to me as far as Oregon and Washington, Cal, and Stanford being interested in the Big 12 and the Big 12 interested in them. It didn't really make that much sense to me, but hey, that's what was being told to me, so I passed it on to you. This actually makes sense. Now, of course, all this is contingent on the ACC somehow figuring out how to break the grant of rights. But really, there's one main way to do that, and that's to get 8 teams to vote to break it. If they can convince 8 teams, hey, you have a landing spot in a bigger, better conference where you're going to make more money, then they can break those grant of rights. The other way would be to whittle it down to 8 teams, and then the ACC could vote to dissolve. But if the Big Ten can grab 4 or maybe 6 teams, and the SEC can convince 4 or 6 teams, whatever, hey, you'll have a landing spot here. Then there you go. You have the majority. You have the numbers for the ACC to vote the grant of rights. And if that happens, the ACC is in big time trouble, because then the Big 12 could come over and pick up some leftovers and strengthen their east side of their conference, because that's what they need to do. I'm actually glad that it's kind of shifting away from the Big 12 as far as the Big 12 getting Oregon, Washington, Cal, and Stanford. They're still interested in Arizona and Colorado. From my understanding, Arizona and Colorado have put their application into the Big 12, and the Big 12 is expected to allow them to join the Big 12. Those 2 teams are coming to the Big 12. It was the other teams that are still up in the air, and then that throws in Arizona State and Utah. They were on the outside looking in, but if Washington, Oregon, Stanford, and Cal head to the Big 10, then that opens up those spots, and the Big 12 can bring in Colorado, Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah together. Now, I gotta credit the Big 12. You have to take your shot. You have to go after the bigger brands. Hey, if you miss, it's fine, whatever, at least you tried. So the Big 12 took their shot with Washington, Oregon. It looks like it's not going to pay off. It looks like the Big 10 is who will grab Washington, Oregon, and then the California teams, Cal and Stanford. Don't forget to check out our merchandise store. Anything you could ever want from Golden Blued is at our merchandise store. My favorite shirt is actually the checklist shirt. What really surprised me is that Kevin Warren is interested in Miami and Florida State. Florida State is actually on the list for the SEC, so they might have a decision to make. The SEC doesn't want Miami. Does Florida State want to stick with Miami and go to the Big Ten, or do they want to go to the SEC? So if you count Oregon, Washington, Cal, Stanford, Florida State, and Miami, that's 22 teams. I don't think the Big Ten would stop at 22. I think they would stop at 24. So the other two teams that I think the Big Ten could potentially go after would be Virginia and Virginia Tech. That makes too much sense. You would lock down an entire state as far as TV media market, and it's a pretty good TV media market. You have a great rivalry, so I'm going with Virginia and Virginia Tech. I don't have any sources telling me Virginia or Virginia Tech. This is a strict guess on my part just to get the Big Ten to 24 teams. But if you add all those teams, the Big Ten looks like a really, really good conference. Here's what it looks like if you add Oregon, Washington, Stanford, Cal, Virginia, Virginia Tech, Miami, Florida State. Big Ten would look like this. Cal, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Maryland, Minnesota, Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Purdue, Rutgers, Stanford, Nebraska, Northwestern, UCLA, USC, Washington, Wisconsin, Virginia, Virginia Tech, Miami, and Florida State. That is a stout-looking conference right there. So they get to 24 teams. This is when we start to talk about pods, and a lot of people don't like that term, blah, blah, blah. I know. With the NCAA doing away with divisions to have a conference championship, you don't necessarily need pods. The only reason that I do pods is to make traveling make more sense, and it would make scheduling easier. So this part is just my opinion. I think the Big Ten does go to 24 teams, and when they do go to 24 teams, they're going to have 4 pods with 6 teams in each pod. And this is how I think it should look like. First, you have the Pacific pod. Basically, your Pac-12 teams that you're adding. You have Oregon, Washington, Stanford, Cal, USC, UCLA. Makes a lot of sense. Limits long distance traveling. They still got to travel amongst themselves. And then maybe 1 or 2 games of long distance travel. So you're maybe looking at 1 game a year where you got to go across the country. That is manageable. That is doable. That was the one thing that I was worried about USC and UCLA going to the Big Ten. They're out on an island. Yes, it's a long trip for the other teams to go out there. That's only 1 game a year for them every year. For USC and UCLA, it's pretty much every away game that they have to fly across the country. So this makes a lot of sense. There's your Pacific pod. Your next pod would be your Midwest pod. This is where you'd have Nebraska, Northwestern, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. I think that's a solid pod. It makes a lot of sense. The next pod I call the Great Lakes pod. This would be Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, Indiana, Purdue, and Penn State. That is a tough pod. That would be the toughest pod in the entire nation. If the SEC went to pods, if the Big 12 went to pods, that would be the number 1 pod. And I'm saying that over the pod that the SEC would have, that included Alabama, Ole Miss, Auburn, LSU, Mississippi State, and Arkansas. Better than that pod. That's a great pod. Finally, the East Coast pod. We go from a great pod to a very weak pod. You would have Maryland, Rutgers, Virginia, Virginia Tech, Miami, and Florida State. So there are some good brands in there with Miami, Florida State, Virginia, and Virginia Tech. But then you throw in Maryland, Rutgers, it's not all that impressive. I think that would be the weakest pod out of all of them. Now, if Miami's brand comes back up to where it's supposed to be, and so does Florida State, then that pod could be a legit pod as well. But right now, as is, in the state of affairs that these brands are in right now, that does not look like a very good pod, but it has potential. And that's what we're looking at with all this conference realignment. We're looking at potential. What these teams bring to the table as far as TV market, size of the fan base, boosters, NIL potential. It's all about money. So to recap, for sure, the Big Ten is interested in Washington, Oregon, Stanford, and Cal. They're also interested in Florida State and Miami in their top 6. And then I threw in Virginia and Virginia Tech to make it make sense for the Big Ten to go to 24 teams. I do think the Big Ten will go to 24 teams, and I think this would be the best way for them to do that. Y'all let me know in the comments section, do you think this gets done? The Big Ten has already grabbed UCLA and USC. Can they lock down Oregon, Washington, Stanford, and Cal? And then in the future, do you think they get to 24 teams? And if so, who do they add? That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.